My name's Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. And I am a member. Now, I've got to tell you something. I'm 76 years old, and I have these memory slips. I sometimes, when I do different series and stuff down in Florida, whatever it is, I have my grand sponsees or stuff like that, and they're taping me or whatever the heck is going on down there. And sometimes I have to turn to him because I forget my sobriety date. I mean, he says, when was that? And they have to tell me how long I've been sober and stuff like that. So don't be surprised if I skip a beat or something like that. It's not a bad deal because I used to be able to remember a lot of things. I used to know everything. Unfortunately, that's all I knew. I didn't know how to be a decent human being. I didn't know how to keep a marriage together. I didn't know how to love people instead of crying out for somebody to love me. I didn't know the important stuff of life, but I knew a lot of facts. I was educated far beyond my capacity to understand anything. I was going for my PhD in algebraic topology and graduated departmental honors in mathematics, and then I went to law school and became a division chief and a major crimes prosecutor in Miami during the cocaine cowboy days, and I have a law office now in Dade County, and I go to I belong to the South Dixie virtual group, which meets at 4:00 every day, Eastern Standard Time. We got people from all over the world. And we get, 60, 70 people from all over the world. And also I do a workshop every Friday night. And we get, about 60, 70 people called an Alive Again workshop. And on Saturday mornings, like this is Saturday, right? Yep. Like we had a workshop here. I did a workshop here. But on Saturday mornings, I do a virtual workshop. We get about 90 to 100 people. And it's from all over the world. And it lasts 5 hours. I take this program seriously. And I hang out with people who take this program seriously, but this ain't going to be no 5 hours, okay? So relax. Although I used to go into a bar at 4:30 in the afternoon with a wife and a baby at home, and I'd come out at 4:30 in the morning all the time. And I'd miss dinner, and I'd lie to my wife, and I did that all the time. Drinking in a bar for 12 hours was easy for me. There would be guys that come in there and say, I got to leave. You've only been here an hour. They'd have to go back to the wife, their family. I said, I didn't understand why they were leaving. The booze was being served in here. They were leaving the booze, and I didn't understand that. But it's a privilege to be here. It's always good for me to be at an AA meeting. I want to thank the committee for inviting me up here. The fact that I came from like 70-degree weather with balmy breezes coming from the ocean and palm trees. My sponsor said whenever anybody asks you to do some AA, you'll always say yes. And so if you ask me, I'm going to say yes, okay? And then of course when I hear it's 50 degrees below, I say, I must be crazy. I can't get out of it now, but all it attests to is, that part where it says, what's that part, that second step thing? We come to believe that a power greater ourselves will restore society. Yeah. It just shows you I haven't been restored quite yet. That's what it shows. I've spoken to Chris many times over the phone. As a matter of fact, I go to 3 meetings today. I go to a 7 a.m. meeting called Serenity Now, virtual, and a 12 o'clock men's meeting, and a 4 o'clock South Dixie meeting, and sometimes something at night. And I also do step series in Miami, which is something that's indigenous to Florida, South Florida, where you just do a series every week for a room, and it's usually hybrid. We have hybrid meetings. I don't know if you have them up here where you actually show up and there's people there, and it's also on Zoom. So we have a lot of people from Canada that come in. So Chris is also going. I know him also from the meetings because he goes to a lot of the meetings. I don't know whether you go to the workshop. You go to the workshop?
What workshop?
Oh my God. You're so pathetic. Okay, so let's keep on going. It's unbelievable. But in any event, I had the pleasure, I want to tell you something, Joanne called me up So I felt so good. She was so nice. She was so sweet. She called me up and she said, Russ, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm the chairman of the deal. And I said, I just want to tell you, you really need to, I'm 76 years old. He says, oh, by the way, I am an alcoholic. And I haven't found enough to have a drink have I had a drink since January, what is it? January 25th, 1981. And yeah, right. It was, thank you. Cheap applause. Okay, thank you. It was great. Okay, but I appreciate it anyway. So in 1981, although I've got 45 years, 45 years, that was like 5 days ago. I have that. That's in my pocket. I'm right now, so I'm 3 days. How long is it? 3 days? What's this, the 31st? Yeah. So I'm 6 days into my 46th year. I'm deep into my 46th year of sobriety. I'm trying to give myself a little, you know what I mean? I think that's, if you have to be constant, you got to be rigorously honest. So if I say I got 45 years, that's like a lie. I'm deep into my 46th year. You got to be accurate. I'm a lawyer. You want to be accurate. Some judge say, what are you saying? You have 40s, liar. So in any event, I was speaking to Joanne. She called me up. She's very nice. She says, Russell, you have to dress warm and, all that sort of stuff. And I said, oh, yeah, I know all this. I've spoken in Canada. She says, no, I said, look, Joanne, I wear like layers and stuff and all that sort of deal. And she says, no, let me explain this. And what I remember her saying is, she said, I remember her telling me it was 47 below. At which point I said, being fairly bright, I said, below what? And I said, she said, 0. And then I said, is that, oh man, this is a true story. I said, is that centigrade or Celsius or Fahrenheit? And she said, Russell, when it's 47 degrees below, it really doesn't make much of a difference. And I immediately said, I could marry this woman. Sarcasm, my love language. The love language of an alcoholic woman. Unbelievable. If I wasn't married already, man. And all of a sudden I felt good. I said, I'll bet these Canadian alkies are just like that, man. They're probably like that deal. So I almost bought an alcoholic dog the other day before I came. It's true. I like animals. It was an alcohol. I was driving down the street. It's a true story. And there was a guy out there with a sign that said, talking dog, $10. And I don't know what you would do, but I stopped the car and got out of the car. I figured it was all crap, but, I stopped the car and I said, so you got a dog, that you're selling? He says, yeah, absolutely. He says, I said, a talking dog. He said, yeah, he talks. I said, can I go talk to him? I'm old. I don't have much to do. It's either see the talking dog or bowling for dollars. So I said, he's the guy talking. He said, yeah, he's in the back. He's in a cage. So I walked in the back, and there's like this little sort of outdoor cage thing, and there's this like mutt, this like old scraggly looking dog back there. So I walk up to him and I said, and he told me the dog's name was Max. I said, are you Max, the talking dog? And he said, yeah, I'm Max. And I said, you talk? He says, yeah, I've been talking ever since I'm a pup. I said, this is absolutely amazing. You're a talking dog? He says, yeah, I talk. I said, well, what's your story? I said, well, I worked for the CIA for years, and I was stationed in Moscow. And my owner at that time was with the KGB, and I would go over to the Kremlin, and I'd sit in on all the meetings that they had. And of course, they didn't, because I'm a dog, they didn't care. And then my handler, when I'd come back from CIA, would debrief me, and I did that for about 10 years. And then I came back to the States and I worked for Monsanto and in industrial espionage. I go over to DuPont and all this stuff and go to all these meetings, and I'd come back and I'd be debriefed by the people from Monsanto. And I said, well, that's amazing. They ought to make a movie. He says, yeah, I've got an agent there. I'm talking to Ron Howard. We're putting together a movie and everything like that, putting together a script and all that sort of stuff. And I said, well, listen, I have a house right down there in Palmetto Bay, and I've got 8 grandkids, I have 4 kids, and we love animals, we love dogs, and we'd love to have you live with us if you want to. He says, yeah, sure, I'm fine with that. I said, okay, I'm going to go talk to your owner about that, and so I went up and I said, I spoke to your dog. I spoke to Max, and he said he'd be happy to live with us. And I told the owner all about it. He says, sure, no problem with that. I said, so how much is the dog? And he said, $10. You can't read the sign? And I said, you're going to sell a talking dog for $10? I said, look. He said, look. He's a liar. He didn't do any of that stuff. Of all the dogs, I have to get an Alky dog. You know what I mean? It's an Alky. I see there's somebody not laughing in the back. Listen, that was a joke. It didn't actually happen. It's unbelievable. There's always one, But so I'm going to talk a little bit about. Well, my life is a tragedy. I mean, right now it was pretty good when I was drinking. No, you're not supposed to do that. No. If I knew you better, it is. But I'm going to talk a little bit about. What the Big Book says I'm supposed to talk about? The Big Book says each alcoholic, in his own languages and his own point of view, talks about how he formed his relationship with God. I go to, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 meetings a week. I don't know, 3 meetings a day, sometimes 4 meetings a day. And, I don't talk about drinking. Nobody at the meetings talks about drinking. Is that amazing? And they stay sober for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's funny. All they talk about is their relationship with God. And the funny thing is, it's like a package deal. They talk about their faith in God. They talk about He's the central factor of their lives. They talk about there is no middle-of-the-road solution. They talk about their real reliance has to be in God. They talk about how He helped them create the fellowship they crave, which is a fellowship that talks about God. They talk about how they've gone to A for years, and every time, and they don't hear the same stuff that we talk about. They talk about that whenever they try to bring something up, somebody comes up and hits them over the head with the traditions or something and tells them to be quiet, that they're killing newcomers or something. They feel kind of guilty or that people don't like them. You know what I mean? And and we talk about that. And we get people there that have like 10 days and 1 month. And, they keep on coming back and coming back and coming back. And they got 6 years and 7 years. We get people with 30 years or 40 years sobriety that are not happy with their sobriety. You believe that? We go to meetings for 40 years, 30 years, they're not happy with their sobriety. People from all over the world, they come and they're not happy. And they come to our meetings and they talk about the stuff we talk about there, and their whole life changes. Quickly. Not after a year, after a week or 2 weeks. It's like instant coffee. Because they know all about the 12 steps. They know about the Big Book. They know everything. They just missed out on one thing. Just one thing. They missed out of that part at the very beginning where it says, we stood at the turning point. You know why? Because they stood at the turning point and they never turned. It says, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. And it's been my experience, because I've been around for a little while. We have a commercial on TV. I know you don't have it here. I mean, I don't think you have it here. Maybe it's from Farmers Insurance, and it shows a guy. I think it's a nationwide thing in the United States. They insure people and cars and everything like that, and they'll show some sort of really weird thing happen, an accident or something, and the guy will come out and he says, "We handle stuff like that." He says, "You know why we handle stuff like that?" He says, we know a lot because we've seen a lot. And I'll tell you, I was, as I said, I was educated far beyond my capacity to understand anything, because if you're an alcoholic and you're smart, that's a dangerous thing, because I rationalize. I tell myself rational lies. I say to myself things like, I don't give a crap what people think about me. And then I go out and I spend money I don't have to buy stuff I don't need to impress you. I say, I'll sometimes say it out loud. I say it to myself all the time. I don't care crap. I don't give a crap. And then I'll sit at a meeting and I'll worry about what I said after the meeting. I'll worry about what people think about me. I'll be in a classroom and the teacher will say, "Does anybody know the answer?" And I want to raise my hand, but I'll say, "But what if I'm wrong?" Or, that kind of stuff. Anybody have a question? And I have a question, but I don't want to raise my hand because people will think I'm stupid. And I'm not stupid. I spend a whole life worrying about what people are going to think about me, which I think is, it says somewhere in the book that, I may be wrong about this. You correct me if I'm wrong, because we got some old timers here. I think it says in the book that drinking is only a symptom of the disease. The real disease centers in our mind, not our body. It's because we're insane. That's it, because we're crazy, So I figured out why people drink again. Because they don't drink again because they crave alcohol. Because you crave alcohol after you take the first drink. With me, it's alcohol and Lay's potato chips. But, the bottom line is, I'm being honest with you. But in any event, that's why they crave. But you see, the reason people with 10, 20, and 30 years or 40 years drink again is because they go insane. And they can go insane with 30 years. They can go insane with 20 years going to meetings. I know they told you. I'm just telling you my experience. It may not be your experience, just my experience. Because between a few months and 45 years, you see a lot in your own life. You see a lot in your own life. So what happens is I know people that, and I've seen this. I've seen people with 5 years drink again, and with 10 years drink again, and with 20 years drink again, with 22 years and 30 years drink again. I've seen it happen. And this was sort of predicted by, the interesting thing is it was predicted by Bill Wilson, right? In the big book, it says here and then a former drinker says, "Feel better, look better, having a better time." He says, "We laugh at such Sally. We know he'll try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. Soon he'll know loneliness as few do. He'll be at the jumping off place. He'll wish for the end." And it also says there'll come a time in every alcoholic's life we'll have no defense against first drink. This defense is going to have to come from God, right? That's what it says. And it doesn't tell you when that may happen. It could happen when you have 20 years. It could happen more than once where you have no defense, stuff like that. So you got to understand, I have this quandary with me. It's a quandary because I want to share my message, the original Bill Wilson message. You guys know what the original message was. The original message is in Alcoholics Anonymous number 3, Bob Dotson, the man on the bed. That thing that said, came to believe, that's what it said. The original alcoholic message was Bill Wilson after he came out of the hospital, and Bob Dotson said, "I knew there was something more, something I hadn't got, and I was trying to find the answer." And one day Bill was in my home, and we were having lunch, probably a tuna fish sandwich or something, His wife's name was Henrietta, by the way, not Cyberlane. And he said, and Bill said this, I was trying to find the answer. He said, "Henrietta, the Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this terrible disease, that I have to keep talking about it and telling other people. And Bob Dotson he said, I think I've got the answer. Bill was very, very grateful to God for everything that happened to him, and he gave all credit to God. Pretty good, huh? That's Alcoholics Anonymous between 1935 and 1939, 1940. And then 3 weeks later, or 4 weeks later, you know what he said? He said,
Sorry, we need you closer to the mic.
You do? Okay, thank you for telling me that. So 3 days later, or 4 weeks later, or 2 months, whatever it is later, it's in the big book, so I'm allowed to talk about it. He then said, but soon, worldly clamors, mostly in myself, blocked out his presence. And so I got down on my knees when I came to AA and locked the door. I told you guys this is the workshop, and I got down on my knees because I didn't want to drink again. And I said the third step prayer. I locked the door because I didn't want anybody to walk in on me in my house. I was saying the prayer, and because I didn't want to swear what they might think about me, And then you know what the big book says? We have now completed the third step. Well, you may have completed the third step, but maybe there's more to it than that. And then I got up and I called the bank and I checked my balance. And so it's been ever since. So it's been ever since, the battle between worrying about what you think about me, worrying about the world, worrying about my weight, worrying about how I look, worrying about everything in this world, and then giving short shrift to God. And that's been the problem. That's been my problem, And then one day, after a lot of trials and tribulations, because I've sort of I see two books in AA. I see a book about how a power greater than yourself could solve your drinking problem. And then there's another book in AA, how a power greater than yourself can solve all your problems. And you know something? Well, you know what really happens to you when you stop drinking? You get to experience alcoholism sober. You get to experience all the fears, all the inconsistencies, all the worries, all the loneliness, all the misgivings, all the second guessing, all the voices in your head telling you you're a piece of crap and you're never going to be okay. You're such a jerk, why did you do that? You get to experience life as it is full throttle because you're sensitive. Well, my sponsor told me, you're not sensitive, bro. Great artists are sensitive. You're just touchy. You get to experience all the crap in life that you experienced when you were 13 years old. You know what I mean? Because I was an alcoholic before I started drinking, during the drinking, and after I stopped drinking. You get to experience all that. And after about 5 or 10 or 15 years, it's great not to drink. Every once in a while, a promise comes in and hits you, and it's good for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Then it leaves. You know what I mean? Yeah. All of a sudden, if something comes in and you're worried about money and blah, 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 and you say the straight brand, it goes away. You say, oh, man, this thing really works. But it sort of doesn't come permanently, does it? Never comes permanently. And although the meetings last for 1 hour, this world and the problems in this world, it's 24/7, isn't it? It's 24/7. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and the group ain't there, right? And now you have cancer. And you got to go for radiation therapy or something like that. And they got you in that box for the radiation. And you just notice that the Carl Gables group isn't there with you. And you're not sure that a 4-step inventory will help you. Because you're in that little box, the MRI. I know a lot of guys don't know what that's like to be sitting there for like 20, 30 minutes in an MRI or a radiation thing or something like that. Sort of like being in a coffin and nobody's there. It's just you. You'll know loneliness if you do. And you get to know the fear and all that sort of stuff, And you're either going to be there alone or you're going to be there with your faith, which I think has something to do with AA because they say it says we never apologize for our faith. All men of faith have courage. Women too. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate with our testimony, telling others what he's done for us. And then you know what happens? At once we begin to outgrow fear. So when did I start outgrowing fear? Well, the truth is it probably didn't really start happening until after I was 15, 20, 25 years sober, until I saw that second book in AA. There's a book about drinking. There's a book about God. It's somewhere. It starts somewhere in that thing about the chapter to the agnostic. You know, this sort of thinking has to be abandoned because it says if a mere code of morals or better philosophy of life would have helped us, we would have been sober a long time ago. It didn't help us. Didn't help us. 10 Commandments didn't help us. Nothing helped us. You know. So we bought a book. We got a book that's spiritual, and therefore we have to, of course, they use the word "of course" talk about God. And he says, here's the trouble, and here it's where we have trouble with alcoholics. They don't say alcoholics; they say with agnostics. You know what agnostics are? People who are in the middle of the roads. People who haven't really turned. People who are just faking it. And it's okay to fake it. You can fake it until you make it. But the point is, when are you going to make it? You know, let me ask this one. It says, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. When's your now? When's that happen? Does that ever happen? So, I mean, that second step thing where it says, come to believe about power greater than yourself will restore your sanity. What's your sanity? What's your definition of sanity? Is sanity being up and worrying about yourself and what other people think about you for 20 years? Is that sanity? Is sanity worrying about, judging yourself by what a scale says? Am I my shoes? Am I my jack? Am I my car? Is sanity waking up every morning and saying, if I only had a car, I'd be okay. If I only had a wife, I'd be okay. If I only had a girlfriend, if I only had sex, I'd be okay. Is that an insane life? What kind of life? Is that the new freedom or the new happiness? Well, what about instead of that, how about being rocketed to the fourth dimension of existence? How about experiencing much of heaven? How about knowing peace? How about being peaceful? How about being peaceful? That's something that they say you can get in AA, which is actually, it's more than, believe it or not, it's more than not drinking. It's more than not drinking. It is. It's more than not drinking. But all you have to do is do the great fact. And you're not going to believe what the great fact is. It's so consistent. Great fact is that God has to be the central fact of your life. And you have to be convinced, no middle of the road, convinced that he lives in your heart and mind in a way which is the miraculous, doing for you what you can't do for yourself. Absolutely convinced. So if God is the central fact of your life, and you're absolutely convinced that he's doing for you what you can't do for yourself, and let's say you do believe the way Bill Wilson believed, the Lord has done everything. I'm so grateful to the Lord because he's done everything for me, curing me of this terrible disease. Let's say you believe that stuff. Is that going to stop you from talking about it? And if it stops you from talking about it because you're worried about some guy in the front row who isn't even paying your visa bill, do you really believe in God? Is he really the central fact in your life? Or is it just some crap you say at an AA meeting to make people understand that you've got sobriety? Are you the real deal, or are you just another phony? Just an agnostic? But forget all that. I get off the subject. Let's talk about me. I don't know. I just like to throw that stuff out there. So I just like to throw stuff out there because when I leave here, I want to be able to be right with the God of my understanding. So I said, I gave them the message. Whether they listen or not, it's up to them. I'm not here to impose anything, but I can walk away, feeling that I did what I was supposed to do and be of maximum service to God and other people, which I think is all big book stuff. And then you notice what happens as you go along, that there's two types of AA. There's a Bill Wilson type of AA and then a Dr. Bob type of AA, and I talked about that today at the workshop. So I'm not going to go into it because I do think I'm supposed to tell my story. So how can I tell let me see, I'm 76 years old. 76 years old, and I'm sober, I'm deep into my 46th year. Six days into my 46th year. So how do I fit that into like 20 minutes or 30 minutes? So I'm going to do my best. There's probably more to it, but so I drank because no woman, no amount of money, no job, no car ever worked quite as well as just a few drinks. That's all, just a few drinks. I walk in that bar worrying about what people are going to think about me, although I would never tell you I was worried about people thinking about me because I'm a liar. I'm delusional. I don't know the truth from the false, so I lie to myself. I tell myself lies. I say, I don't give a crap what people think about me. I say it dramatically. I don't give a crap what they think about me. Get a few drinks in me, I'm screaming, I don't give a crap what they think about me. But ultimately, you realize that people that keep on saying don't give a crap what people think about you, all they do is think about what people think about them, because people that really don't give a crap what people think about you don't say stuff like, I don't give a crap like people think about me. They say things like, pass the ketchup, or something like that, but they don't say that stuff, you know what I mean? So, I walk in the bar worrying about what the gal's going to think of me or the guys are going to think about me. I take a couple of shots of that stuff, and I feel like I own the group, you know what I mean? I can go up to a girl and say, hey, you want to dance? No, I says, hey, you don't know what, hey, you're a problem, lady, you know what I mean? I like turn into, what does that for? But you know what the problem is also? I'll tell you another problem. This is just as a side in case you've noticed it. Even after I stopped drinking, the women still work. Not as fast and not as good as alcohol, and there's like side effects, which I won't go into. I've been married for 46 years. My sponsor, at 45 years, my sponsor said, don't do anything major decisions during the first, year or so. And so I got married when I had 3 months, and I didn't think it was a big deal. I was probably wrong, but now, at 45 years later with all these kids and grandkids, and it's too late now, She's in Al-Anon, Our Ladies of Perpetual Revenge, and, she's terrible. It's a bane of my life, you know what I mean? But I've gotten but sobriety and trusting in God, along with Alzheimer's, and being forgetful and not remembering everything. And, how they say we know but a little? I really do know but a little. I used to know everything, but now I know but a little. You know what I mean? But what's the great thing about sobriety? I'm going to tell you something about sobriety. You really don't have to know much. You don't have to know much. Maybe one or two things. If all you have to know, really, you only have to know one thing. That's what Dr. Bob said. You only have to know one thing. When he went to, I'm not going to go through this. This is workshop stuff. So in any event, so I drank, and my deal is that unfortunately for me, if I could drink the way I drank when I was 18, and if it did for me what it did for me when I was 18, I'd still be drinking it. But unfortunately, it stopped working for me. And the real sad news about my life, it stopped working for me 10 years before I realized it stopped working for me, and I hurt a lot of people. And, one time, I was, I walked in nobody has a story. I didn't have any stories, you know what I mean? I didn't have a story, and, and you can't tell an alcoholic anything, I mean, you can't tell me he's an alcoholic. So where do you get your stories? Where do you find out? How do you sit in an A room, judging people, looking at people, trying to figure out people who you like, who you don't like. Some guy gets up and says something. How do you tell an alcoholic? Some guy says something totally insane. You go, that guy is flipping crazy. And then you realize, holy shit, I was doing the same thing last week. You know what I mean? And you learn about yourself. You say, man, I was doing that. And then next thing you know, you start developing stories, right? You go to your group and you say things like, and then I had a fight with my mother, and my mother said this, and she said that, and man, I was going to blow up, and I said this, and it was the perfect thing, and everything was wonderful. And then they go to the group and he says, and they tell you, you can't wait to tell your group about this thing you said and you did and everything like that, and then you say these lines, then you're an A, and that's not me. And by the way, it's not you. You want to make sure that whoever you were never comes back in your life again. You want to make sure that the person that was running your life vanishes. I know, did anybody ever Is there something in the big book that says God gave us brains to use? And I thought, that's a good thing because I love my brain because I'm so smart, right? But it's a lie from the pit of hell. I figured that out when I started reading the second book in AA. Because, the first book says God gave us brains to use so we can think. But you see, before it says God gave us brains to use, it says upon awakening, we ask him to direct our thinking. So I figured it out. The Lord works in mischievous ways, his miracles to perform. He gave us brains so he could use them. And you know what? When I make that turn and I let him use them, I don't worry about what kind of car I'm driving. I don't worry whether you like me or not. I don't doubt. I don't get scared of whether you like this talk or don't like this talk. I don't worry about, I'm not my shoes, I'm not my weight, I'm not that deal. And I didn't understand it. It just came out of my mouth like it was nothing, because that's the way I am. And then years later, after being in AA, I said, I wonder how that could, how does it feel when you have a child with a man and you love him and your marriage is breaking up and you go to a marriage counselor to save it and his only remark is, I want to date other women. What kind of clown says stuff like that? Who says stuff like that? A bum. An irresponsible bum. A jerk says stuff like that, and that's who I am. Now, I got to be honest with you. I know it says in the big book, we will not regret the past. I'm going to tell you something. For me, that's not true. And I'm going to tell you something. I made amends to my wife. There's nobody that I know of that I owe amends to. I made amends to my wife. She got remarried to somebody else. And I'm going to tell you something. Till the day I die, I will regret how I treated that woman. It's like a rip in my heart. It won't go away. Now, it's not the type of thing where it totally affects my life. But I've chosen to believe. One of the things, how you get a new perspective by repeated humiliations, final crushing? You can get a new perspective. You know what my perspective on that is? Just thought I'd share it with you. Because it worried me, because the big book says we'll not regret the past. What kind of person would I be? Would you ever trust me? What kind of person would I be if I said it didn't bother me anymore, or I didn't regret that? And I've decided that what the Lord has done for me is he's allowed me to have that thorn in my flesh. He's allowed me to have that pain in my heart and that regret, so I'm not some conceited son of a bitch thinking I'm spiritual, not religious. I used to say that all the time. And then when it really started hurting me, he says, Russ, that's exactly who you really are without God. You're the guy who said to that gal, you're the wife of your wife and the mother of your child. You're the guy who said, I just want to date other women. That's who you are. That's who you really are. Don't go walking around saying how spiritual you are and how wonderful you are. You're just a material man. As long as you're in this flesh, that's who you are. You don't feel, let's see what happens when the IRS grabs all your money. Let's see what happens when this happens or that happens. You're a big shot, you know what I mean? And you want to know something? It's the best thing that happened to me because I have a realistic view of who I am. And I'm not a saint. We are not saints. I'm an alcoholic just like Bill Wilson was an alcoholic, like everybody's an alcoholic. You know what I mean? Left to my own devices, I would, even if I wouldn't drink, I would turn right back into that man. That evil man who didn't give a crap about it anyway. And you know what's interesting? Bill Wilson, what he said when he wrote The Next Frontier, one of the things he said, because he was trying to find the answer. Why can't I be why can't he said, the answer is in the prayer of St. Francis. And that's where it is. If you look real hard, you'll find it there. It's an answer of allowing, who wrote the prayer of St. Francis? St. Francis. Listen, that's my first. It's, by the way, I can talk about it because it's conference approved. By the way, there's nothing conference not approved. There's no such thing as conference not approved. Conference approved is books they publish and make some money off of that. But in any event, make a few bucks. I don't want to be cynical or anything. I am a lawyer, So the bottom line is that, and you know what the prayer of St. Francis is? You're more concerned with loving people than being loved. You're more concerned with understanding people than being understood. You know, and I'm not spiritual. I'm the guy who was more concerned about me. So how do you do that? How do you make that turn? I used to say to my sponsor would say, why do you say the things you say? Why do you do the stuff you do, Russell? And I said, well, that's just my personality. He says, your personality's killing you. I said, I know how to stop drinking. How do you get rid of your personality? I kind of like my personality. You know what I mean? Don't give a crap. You know, so, how do you get rid of your personality? You know, I guess it has something to do with the sixth step. What did Ed Dahl say? You know, the priest, what did the guy say? The clergyman, a good friend of A, he said, the man who's doing the sixth, that's the major step for me. My whole life is now 6 or 7. I mean, of course, it's 12 step, but it's 6 and 7. You know why? Because 6th step, I know that's the step because that's the step that separates out the men from the boys, the women from the girls, the children in the alcohol kindergarten from it's the one that separates the fellowship of the problem from the fellowship of the spirit. I know what that 6th step is about, and I know what he says the 6th step is because I read the sentences. I now understand things. You come home drunk one more time. I understand the sentences, you know. I don't get muddied up by Appendix 2 or all that sort of stuff. I know what the sentence says. The man who has done the 6th step is one who's repeatedly trying to grow in the image and likeness of God. I understand that deal. I understand what that means. I understand what I'm supposed to do now, you know. If all I do is focus on the drinking, which is important certainly when you come in new, I'll eventually drink again or slip back into it. You know what I got to do? I got to talk about it in my own language from my own point of view, how I develop a relationship with God. Then I got to do what it says in the last page of that big book. You know what it says in the last page? It says, but we won't know you. He says, that's not important. That's God will figure that out. Your real reliance must be on God. He'll show you how to create the fellowship you crave. So you know what I've done? I've created the fellowship I crave. It's on Zoom. I go there all the time, and nobody's drinking, and nobody's worrying. You know what I mean? It's a different type of AA. It's sort of like the AA from 1935 to 1939. You know, before they had that. You know, it's a strange story. I know it's kind of strange. You don't hear this much in your meetings, but that's okay. It won't hurt you. You know, really, nobody talks about this stuff, right? So it ain't going to kill you. You know what I mean? So just. What I would do if I was you is just forget everything I just said. Just forget everything I just said. Just bring it back to your memory when you got 19 years and 20 years and you're sucking on the muzzle of a gun and say, maybe that guy wasn't crazy. Maybe there's something more to this thing than just not drinking and going to meetings, not drinking, even if your ass falls off. So I went up to my sponsor, being sober and doing all this stuff and all that stuff. I went to a meeting. Just 2 more stories, and I think we'll probably finish it up. I don't know how long I've been talking. I don't want to overstay my welcome. So I went to a meeting when I was about 2 or 3 years sober, and there was a guy chairing the meeting. This guy named Al Kennedy, and I think Al probably was my age, like in his 70s, and I think he probably had over 40 years. And he gave a talk, and I'm a sucker for good AA speakers. I used to listen, man, to Clancy all the time, and Johnny Harris and everything like that. And you know, all my heroes, my AA heroes, they're all dead. You know? I mean, that whole tier, you know, Sandy Beach, all gone, you know, but in any event, so I went to this meeting. It was Al Kennedy, and I'm listening to this guy. I'm in the front row like you guys, and I'm watching him. My jaw's like like this, and the guy was amazing. He was like a man's man. I mean, he was talking to me like we were all alone in a coffee shop. There was like 300 people there. You know what I mean? It was like he was so comfortable in his own skin. And I said, man, I wish I could be. Man, I don't know what that guy. It was like the guy Bill Dotson's looking at Bill Wilson and saying, man, I knew I was missing something, a sort of a relief, some sort of release, a happiness that a person ought to have. A rocket in the 4th dimension, experiencing much of heaven, knowing peace. It's some sort of deal. And I'm looking at this guy, Al Kennedy, and they're few and far between. When you go to meetings, let me tell you something. Once in a while, you're going to run into an Al Kennedy. You're going to run into. I ran into my Al Kennedys. I surrounded my John Glenn's. That was one of my third sponsor. I met him. It was unbelievable. And so I went. And the bottom line is that I love these people. And so I say to my sponsor when he's done speaking, and everybody clapped, and it was good. And he's done speaking, I turn to my sponsor. And my sponsor used to say crazy stuff to me. I'll tell you, I was supposed to be sponsored by Albert Einstein, you know what I mean, or Jesus Christ or something like that. And they gave me some used car salesman from Chicago. I don't know how that worked out. He was terrible. When I was 3 months sober, this is true, I was broke. The big shot lawyer, I'm married, I'm going to be evicted from my house, I'm broke, I have no money, I didn't know what to do, I was magnifying my mind, I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I could have told I'm not going to tell my group, not that I care what they think about me, but I'm not going to tell anybody about it. And then finally it got so bad, I finally told my sponsor, I told him all about it, I needed money, and I was going in, and they were going to evict me and everything. He says, don't even worry about it, Russ, I got you covered. I'm going to take care of that. You don't have no problem. I said, man, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I got my catcher's mitt out. He's going to give me a couple of $1,000. And after the meeting was over, he takes me over to the coffee machine. He shows me how to make coffee for the group, shows me how to set up the chairs. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure I really expressed my concern properly to this guy. I love AA, but we're talking money. It's like not important, just right up there with oxygen. And so I had to make coffee for the group, and I made coffee for the guy. I didn't want to go the next day because I was still broke, and I was depressed. I was very depressed. You ever been very depressed? Of course. You skip over depressed. You go right to very depressed. And I didn't want to go to the meeting, but I had to go because I had to make the stupid coffee. Because if I didn't go, what would they think about me? Not that I give a crap what other people think about me. You understand what I'm saying? And then I went there, and a month later, the money came in, and everything was okay. And some guy comes up and he says, I'll make coffee for the group. I says, I'm the coffee maker. Who appointed you to be the coffee maker? And so I go up to my sponsor after Al Kennedy speaks, and he says, I said, that guy Al Kennedy, I want to hang out with him. What group he belongs to, I want to hang out with him. And so you can never trust my sponsor. He says, I want to say, he says, and he looks at me, he says, well, he's dying. So I said, I want to hang out with the guy. He's out there, he's loving on people, he's helping people, he's happy as, he's filled with joy, and he's talking about God and everything. And I said, no, I'm talking about the guy who just spoke. He says, yeah, he's dying. I said, I'm talking about the guy who was just up there speaking. He says, Russell, he's dying. He's got cancer. He's got 6 months to live. Now, as far as I know, I may be the only guy in that group of 300 that knew that. There are probably others, but imagine you hear somebody speaking, and I'm an alcoholic. I go to a meeting, I have a hangnail. That's good for 4 meetings. You know what I mean? And he didn't say anything. I said, I know. But he didn't talk about that. He was trying to help other people, and I said, I know. And my idea of what sobriety was, what real sobriety was, what real sanity was, went from not drinking to a whole other vision for you dimension. I wanted the sobriety. I wanted that deal where you didn't worry about dying. I didn't want to settle for less than that. I didn't know how to get it. I didn't know how to get it then, but I knew it was possible because I saw Al Kennedy have it. So one last story. So I'm 10 years sober now, and I had a fight with my wife because you know how she is. And I'm not go into it. You don't even know. I can tell you one last thing. So I had a fight with my wife. So I go up to my sponsor. At that time it was Joe Snyder because John had died, and so what? No, actually, no, John was still alive. No, Joe was my second sponsor. I went up to my second sponsor. I said, I'm getting a divorce. I'm out of here. I didn't sign up for this crap. You know what I mean? And I told him, has anybody here ever had a resentment? Well, let me ask you something. Isn't it true when you despise somebody or have resentment or are very mad, you know why you're mad, right? You know why you're mad, right? You'll stop people, strangers on the street, say, you wouldn't believe it, my wife, you'll tell them exactly why you're mad. It's no mystery, And so I told my sponsor why I was mad and blah, blah, blah. I'm getting a divorce. I don't have to put up with this crap. She said this and I said that. And it's over. The marriage is over and everything like that. And he said, you know why you're upset? And I said, of course I know why I'm upset. Of course, I just spent 20 minutes. Of course I know why I'm upset. He said, why are you upset? No, I've got 10 years. I mean, I'm sponsoring people all over. I'm doing the steps all I'm doing. He says, well, why are you upset? I said, Joe, I just spent 20 minutes telling you in detail why I'm upset. And he looks at me and he says, that's not why you're upset. I said, what are you talking about? He says, that's not why you're upset. I said, when she told me, he says, that's not why you're upset. Well, what about when I said, that's not why you're upset? I must have gone 5 minutes. Well, what about, that's not why you're upset. And I just looked at him. I shut up. And, in my mind, I'm thinking, he knows something that I don't know, because I can tell you, if there's anything I'm interested in, it's me. You know what I mean? And he knows something. So I say to him, I said, do you know why I'm upset? He said, absolutely. You know why I'm upset? He said, oh, jeez, it's so clear. And then he shuts up. I said, well, you going to tell me why I'm upset? He goes, well, I don't know. Do you really want to know? I said, of course I want to know. No, I'm begging him. I'm threatening his life. You know what I mean? Why am I upset? And he says, and these are the exact words he used. He said, listen, stupid. Because apparently I have a sign. This man is stupid. Hit him with a sledgehammer. He said, listen, stupid. You're upset because you're upsettable. I go, what is that? What is this, like Zen AA or something? I'm upset because you're upsettable. So I'm married to the same woman. She's a flippin' monster. She's like designed to just kill me. God gave me the perfect wife. There's nothing. I've never done anything right in my life. As a matter of fact, according to my wife, I've never changed. You know what I mean? Ever. Nothing. Just pure evil. Big mistake. But I'll have these sponsors. They follow me around. My wife will say something, and one of my sponsors say, "Did you hear what your wife just said to you?" And I said, "No." Did she say something? I said, "I've developed the ability to not pay attention to anything. I'm not the same. It's not that she's changed. It's I've changed. I just don't get upset about things. Stuff happens, I don't get upset." Apparently, it wasn't what was going on in the world that was upsetting me. It was something inside of me. You realize, the world goes around like 24/7. It's never going to stop. You're never going to have a situation in this world. You'll always have problems. Be of good cheer. You know what I mean? You don't have to let your problems, they tell you have cancer. You know what I mean? You don't have to get upset. Do you know you don't have to get upset? If you have a life, do you know, like Al Kennedy, that you could have cancer and not be upset? You could even have joy. Did you know that could happen? You could have a life of joy. I mean, I know it's hard to think about, but do you know that you could be broke and not be upset? Did you know you could have people betray you and not be upset? Do you know what I figured out one day? I figured out that if you're not upset and you don't do stupid things, you don't have to make amends. As a matter of fact, they even say that in the big book. We lose, the thing about tongue and pen. You know what the real thing about 10-step is? You get so sick and tired of making amends, you decide not to do stupid shit. Did you know you could live a life without making amends because you don't hurt anybody? You don't say things like, just I want to date other women. You don't say stupid stuff. You don't hurt people. No matter what your wife does, you don't go up to people and say, I don't love my wife anymore, because love isn't a feeling, it's a decision. You just decide you're going to be with her for her entire life, and you're going to protect her because that's who you are. Because you're a man and you're not a world whore. You're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking only about her and how wonderful she is. Now you're going to protect her because you're a husband, and that's what you're supposed to do. In other words, you think about people the way God thinks about people. It's unconditional love, no matter how they act. You may not approve. You understand what I'm saying? Well, how do you get that deal? Well, I don't know. They talk about it in the big book. It has to do with see to what your relationship with him is right. Then you get to join something called the Fellowship of the Spirit. A whole different deal. In order to be in AA, all you need to be in AA is a desire to stop drinking. You know, it used to be an honest desire. It used to be an honest desire. Then what happened is the Alkies got a hold of this program, and they took out the word honest because they didn't want to hurt anybody's feeling. They took out the word honest because they didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Do you know from 1935 to 1939, if you want to go to an AA meeting, you had to get on your knees in front of all the people in AA and give your life to God? Did you know that? Did you know the books they found absolutely essential, according to Dr. Bob, was 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, and the book of James? Did you know that first things first meant seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness? All things. Did you know that the first meeting of AA was Dr. Bob putting his foot on the rung of a dining room chair and reading the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7? Did you know that? You probably didn't know that, did you? We won't really hear that in AA. You would have to actually read the books. You'd have to read what was going on. There's a great quote by T.S. Eliot in the Four Quatrains, and I think I may have said this in the workshop. He said, "We will not cease our exploration, and in the end of our exploring, we'll come to the place where we started, having known the place for the first time." They got it right between 1935 and 1939, and then they started worrying about what other people would think about them. They figured it out. They had it right, you know? Bill Wilson went up to Henrietta Seiberling and said, "I don't think we should talk so much about God, you know, or religion." And Henrietta said, "Bill, the only reason you're sober is because of God. Have you forgotten?" He says, "If you don't talk about God and what he's done for you in your life, you might as well be the Rotary Club." You know? So sometimes I think we've turned into the Rotary Club. Not on my watch, you know. I'm going to do my thing, you know. That's my deal. But in any event, and so that's what, and all I'm doing here, and I'm so grateful because I was told a long time ago, and it is so true. This is the truth, that if you don't know your real purpose in life, your true purpose in life, you're going to be a neurotic. And I got here, I was one neurotic guy. And I don't have a bucket list. There's not a cruise I have to go on. There's not a country I have to visit. There's not a thing I have to do. You know, I don't wake up in the morning and say, if I only had this, I'd be okay. Or if I only had that, I'd be okay. There's nothing I have to do. The only thing I look forward to is trying to love on other people and help other people. You know what I mean? My purpose is to be a maximum service to God and helping other people, which happens to be the A's purpose, you know, just trying to carry this message and do that deal. And you know it's the perfect purpose, because if that's my purpose, number one, you don't need a lot of money to do that. It's cheap. You know what I mean? You don't even have to have a lot of money in the bank. All you got to do is have to love other people and love God and have a relationship with him. And you do that and you want something, you will never drink again. You'll never drink again. But as soon as you start thinking about all the other stuff you want and all the other stuff you need and all stuff, that's what Bill Wilson said in that essay he wrote. My problem was dependence. I put too much dependence on people, places, things, and on Alcoholics Anonymous. Not my words, Bill Wilson's words. And Dr. Bob's last words to Bill Wilson before he died was, "Let's not screw this thing up. Let's keep it simple. There is one who has all power." You know, that's called an exhortation. It's an encouragement and a warning at the same time, encouraging you to keep it simple and look at what the main deal is. You know what I mean? And warning you, if you don't, there's going to be trouble. So thank you very much. God bless you.